On the 15th of July 1977, a furniture salesman and local politician would leave work after a long day and he would go to a local pub to meet some friends for a round of drinks, after which he would bid them all a good night and leave to go home. This was the last time anybody would see him alive or see him ever again, for that matter. All that would be left were his car with the keys lying beneath it, quite an amount of blood, and 3 spent bullet cases from a .22 caliber weapon. Less than 24 hours later, the town of Griffith would be asking what happened to local anti-drugs campaigner and family man Donald Bruce McKay. But before we delve into the disappearance of Don McKay, if you enjoy real crime, unsolved and cold cases, local folklore, paranormal investigations, the missing, disasters and urban legends, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all we do here. So if you could help me out by smashing the like button, hitting the subscribe button and ringing the bell so that you never miss a video, and drop a comment or 2 in the comment section below and share my videos among your friends, that would be amazing and would help me out a ton in the YouTube algorithm. It costs you absolutely nothing to subscribe and it helps me out more than you know. So with the formalities out of the way, let's begin. Donald Bruce McKay was born in Griffith, New South Wales and raised in Sydney. His wife Barbara was an active member of the Uniting Church in Griffith and was a part-time physiotherapist. The couple had 4 children, Paul, Ruth, Mary and James. McKay and his family ran a furniture business in Griffith called McKay's Furniture, and the family still owns a property in Griffith, but the furniture store was sold in July of 2019. Unfortunately, not all of the businesses owned in Griffith in the late 1970s were as wholesome as the McKay's Furniture Store. For years, Griffith was known as a hub for the illegal manufacturing of drugs, with cannabis being grown at an alarming rate. Add to this elements of corruption in other local politicians and the police force, and you have all you need for a major drugs operation. And to the men behind the operations, this made anti-drugs campaigner Donald McKay a threat to what they were trying to achieve. So the man behind all this was a man called Robert Trimboli, or Robert Bruno Trimboli. He was an Australian businessman, a drug baron and an organised crime boss who was alleged to be involved in drug trafficking in Griffith, New South Wales. And it's also, which according to the popular fiction series Underbelly, A Tale of Two Cities, led to a royal commission, a coroner's inquest and an international chase by the Australian government seeking his apprehension after he travelled overseas visiting Europe. So Robert Trimboli would declare bankruptcy in 1972, and then he would come into a substantial amount of money after this, and he would acquire a local restaurant called the Texan Tavern. However, this was not his main source of income. It would soon become clear to Griffith local that the tavern was just a front for a major cannabis operation. Trimboli also became a well-known gambler at the Sydney racetracks. He was gambling hundreds of thousands of dollars every weekend, but it was also a front. It was all part of a money laundering scheme to disguise profits made from the drug trade as race winnings. It was also around this time that Trimboli would establish links to corrupt New South Wales police officers and would soon become known as Aussie Bob, and considered to be a driving force in the mafia operating in the Griffith area. It was also at this time, with the profits rolling in off his illegal business dealings, that Aussie Bob would move his family into an upmarket area of Griffith, New South Wales. It was also at this time, with significant money rolling in off the trade of drugs, that Trimboli would also be able to pay off corrupt politicians who, like the police, would turn a blind eye to the massive operation ongoing in Griffith at this time. One of these politicians close to Aussie Bob was a man named Al Grasby, another local politician and federal immigration minister at that time. He would be heard to repeat during press conferences and interviews that there was absolutely no mafia operating in Griffith. He had been paid well to keep his silence and the secrets of Aussie Bob and others. In turn, this would see the Italian community bankroll Grasby's political campaigns with the proceeds from the illegal drugs trade. In 1974, Grasby even visited Platy in Italy, and this was where Ozzy Bob's family had originated, and Al Grasby was even given the keys to the city. So the thing about Platy in Italy, it is like the mecca for the mafia. It is a lawless city, it's a very dangerous city, and it is ruled by the mafia. And Platy is where Ozzy Bob's family originated and came from and immigrated to Australia. So that was why Grasby kind of went over there for a bit of a visit. Grasby wasn't Italian himself, he was actually Anglo-Saxon, but he did become a major champion in the Italian community in Griffith and in Platy, as you will see when I cover the next part of this twisted web of deceit, lies and murder. So, as I said, he was fast becoming a champion with the Italian community and within Griffith and overseas. So, what he ended up doing was he also managed to get visas for several Calabrian immigrants who were previously denied entry to Australia due to their criminal connections. Now they were allowed in because he was immigration minister and he granted their visas. So meanwhile, Griffith locals are complaining that politicians and some of the police force are protecting the growing drug operations. So some of the police were simply turning a blind eye, however, others were found to be involved in the operations and the cover-ups. In 1974, police finally execute a raid on a small cannabis crop being grown out at a farm in Tarbogan, just outside Griffith. And this is where we see another player enter the story, a man named Rocco Barbaro. He is actually arrested and charged with the possession of illegal substances, being cannabis. Following this, a local agricultural officer, Patrick Joseph Keenan, accidentally uncovered yet another cannabis farm. This was then reported to Griffith Detective Senior Sergeant John Ellis. It is also the next day the agricultural officer is paid a threatening visit about the report, and later in the same day police would conduct a raid on the farm and arrest the owner. Some weeks later, however, in a horrific coincidence, another man, also named Patrick Joseph Keenan, and he was no relation to the original man, his body was found deceased in a local drain. So with no connection to the original Patrick Joseph Keenan, his death is ruled as accidental drowning. The next day, the owners of the farm that was raided appeared in court, and they were all let off with fines and released. The crops were then harvested by local Italian workers and held by Trimboli in one of his local farm sheds. So I think it's pretty safe to say that somebody had ordered a hit on the agricultural officer, and the other poor gentleman who had exactly the same name and had absolutely no connection to him, killed, I would say, in a case of mistaken identity. Years later, John Ellis and two fellow officers, John Robbins and Brian Borthwick, were found to have large sums of money believed paid to them to pervert the justice system in New South Wales, which all three would stand trial for later and be convicted for. Heretofore, it seemed the drug trade was untouchable, but the raids and investigations drew the attention of local furniture salesman and politician Donald Bruce McKay, who would present a challenge to them, being that he was also a prolific anti-drugs campaigner, and he was a respected leader in the local Griffith community. However, nobody was prepared for the coming events that would shock and dismay all of Australia. Don McKay was the third son of Lennox and Phyllis McKay, who operated the family furniture business in Griffith originally, before turning it over to their sons in their retirement. After attending school in Sydney, Don returned to Griffith, where he married his wife Barbara 2 years after his return, and coming back to work at the family's business with his brother. So Donald and Barbara would go on to have 4 children and are very active in their church and local community organisations. Don and Barbara were very well liked and respected amongst the Griffith community. Don would also go on to stand as a candidate for the Liberal Party in a series of elections. who had run for state parliament 3 times and for federal parliament twice. So as you might expect, Don McKay was really beginning to get some clout behind him, particularly in 1974 in the election, which saw Don's preferences assist in getting the National Party candidate for that year elected. But the candidate who was defeated due to Don's preferences was none other than Al Grasby, popular local Labor member and immigration minister and friend to the Italian community, and this included Robert Trimboli. During Don's political campaign, voters were consistently expressing their concerns to McKay about the growing local cannabis industry and the effect it was having on Griffith's young people. This led Don to take an interest in the illegal drug trade taking place in Griffith. In 1974, his wife Barbara, also passionate about protecting Griffith's youth from the growing drug trade, would write a letter to a local newspaper about it. In turn, McKay's political campaign would then begin to focus on Robert Trimboli's extensive drug operations. Of course, this wasn't lost on Aussie Bob, who would be heard shouting death threats aimed at McKay to one of the local Griffith police officers that he noticed on the street while he was driving through Griffith, and he was quoted as yelling at this officer, "Tell McKay to back off or I'll shoot him." It was after this that McKay began to receive other threats from multiple associates of Aussie Bob Trimboli. However, Don McKay was not intimidated by this, and during 1975, he was still pushing for something to be done about the drugs and the local drug lords running the operations. Reporters would also deliver an almost unending stream of information and tip-offs, to which Don would discuss with his solicitor and friend Ian Salmon. Ian would go on to say that they discussed at length what to do with the information, as the Griffith police at the time were not to be trusted. Soon after this, McKay is given a tip-off about an extensive operation at nearby Polyamberley and drives to Sydney to present the information to senior members of the New South Wales Police Drug Squad. Soon after, the drug squad team descended on Griffith and conducted a raid at the Polyamberley farm, where they would, lo and behold, find what is still to this day to be considered the largest illegal cannabis crop ever found in Australia. Also, they would seize a sizable illegal arsenal of firearms and knives. 5 men are arrested and charged, including a man known as Francesco Sergi. When brought to trial in 1977, all men except Sergi are found guilty and given short prison terms. 10 days after the verdict was delivered, it came to light that a relative of Sergi was actually on the jury at his trial. And yeah, that's not usually allowed. So usually this would be seen as a conflict of interest, and the trial would be stopped and a new jury would be selected. In this case, however, with corruption running rife, the trial was allowed to go ahead, with the relative still among the jurors. Several months later, a declaration of no bill was made due to this conflict of interest, and all the charges ended up being dropped. But this is not where the impact of the Polyamberley trial would end. It was during this trial that Don McKay would be named as the driving force behind the raid on the farm, and this would put him firmly in the crosshairs of the local mob. Robert Trimboli, Aussie Bob, now knows without a shadow of a doubt that Donald Bruce McKay is the police informant. A reporter covering the trial would be heard later to say, "I believe they have just served Don McKay's death warrant." During the trial, police would go on to raid a second farm at Euston, just west of Griffith. 4 more suspects are arrested, and the raids are alleged to have cost Robert Trimboli over $90 million. And this is in like 1975, 1974. By today's values, it would stretch into the hundreds of millions. And as you can imagine, Robert Trimboli was not a happy man. It is after this raid that police trace the cannabis from Euston to the streets of Sydney and go on to arrest a Sydney drug dealer connected to the operations, whose $50,000 bail is posted by a Griffith police officer by the name of Sergeant Arthur Liddell. And sometime after this, Arthur Liddell is actually found deceased beside his overturned car on the outskirts of Griffith. Following this, the local newspaper runs a story about the Polyamberley trial and the vote for a no bill concerning Francesco Sergi. stating that no retrial concerning his involvement will be had. According to the Woodward Royal Commission, a first attempt on Don McKay's life followed only a few days later. So this was in the form of a setup. Don received a phone call from a man only identifying as Mr. Adams, who was interested in buying some furniture and floor coverings from a property in nearby Jerilderie. Initially, Don agreed to meet this Mr. Adams, but on the day in question, Tuesday the 12th of July 1977, he became busy with other things and sent his salesman Bruce Perhouse instead. So Bruce would then drive to Jerilderie in Don's distinctive gold-coloured Ford sedan. Luckily for Bruce, he took his father-in-law along on the drive for company, a decision that he maintains to this day that probably saved his life. They would pull into the designated meeting place and wait, however nobody showed up. They would notice a car parked opposite the tennis courts just across from them, and it was a white Ford Falcon, which would sit there for a while and then eventually began to pull out. It would then repark 2 car spaces to the left of Bruce and his father-in-law across from the post office. They would then witness a threatening-looking man leave the car with a large manila envelope under his arm, where he would then enter the post office. He would then come back out and stand staring at Bruce and his passenger. After this, he would simply return to his car and drive away, back in the direction of Griffith. Don dismissed the incident as a hoax. However, the Woodward Royal Commission would later find a contract killing had in fact been arranged on the date mentioned. So on Friday the 15th of July, Don went to work at the furniture shop as usual. He would also meet up for his family for lunch in town, and this would be the last time his family would ever see him again. Barbara, who had arranged to go out for the evening, was expecting Don home by 7 p.m. to take care of their youngest son. As he's leaving work, he calls Barbara to let her know he's stopping at the pub, but promises he'll definitely be home by 7 p.m. so that she can go out. At around 5:30, he locks the store and heads to the Hotel Griffith for a drink before heading home. This is where he parks the store's minivan in the car park and heads inside to the bar, and as he enters, he has a friend shout an encouragement to him involving his work bringing down the cannabis industry. He then meets friends and they sit around discussing the situation for about an hour or so. At 6:30, he leaves the bar and walks through to the bottle shop next door to buy some wine to take home. And this is the last time anyone would ever see Don McKay. He then walked across the dark car park to his minivan. It is believed it was from here that Don McKay was shot 3 times with a .22 caliber weapon, and his body was transferred to another car and driven away. The murder took mere seconds, it was quick and professional, and there were no eyewitnesses. There was, however, accountant Roy Binks, who was working late in his office across the road, and he would go on to say that he did hear something, like a disturbance in the car park around the time it is believed Don McKay was executed. At the time, he thought he was just hearing a local hotel patron being sick, as he would say he heard what he thought to be groaning noises similar to a person being sick and vomiting. This was then followed by what he would describe as a couple of short, sharp cracks and then total silence. The murder of Don McKay would, however, backfire on those who ordered the hit, as it would highlight to the rest of Australia and police that had not been corrupted by the mafia and Robert Trimboli and the other kingpins involved what was going on in Griffith. It was shining a spotlight right on it, what was going on with the illegal drugs trade, how the mafia was involved. It backfired on them enormously. So it would highlight what was going on at the time in the town and making all the illegal dealings a lot harder to ignore. So we go back to the night in question. Back at the house, Barbara is becoming worried when Don fails to arrive home at 7 as planned, and it is extremely out of character for him to be late and not let her know that he was going to be late, or just for him to be late at all. So fearing the worst, Barbara calls his friend and solicitor Ian Salmon, telling him she's concerned about Don, as he has not arrived home this evening as planned. Ian then drives around Griffith looking for Don. At midnight, Don and Barbara's eldest son arrives home from a night out with friends and finds his mother in great distress. So he grabs a couple of his friends to head back out with him, and they launch their own search of Griffith looking for Don. At 1 a.m, Ian Salmon is still searching for Don as well and locates his car in the Hotel Griffith parking lot. Upon approaching the car on that freezing Griffith night, Ian would find the shocking evidence of a very grisly scene. Blood spatter had fallen on the ground around the car, and he saw Don's bloody handprint etched on the glass of the driver's side window. And what he means by it was etched on the window, it was so cold in Griffith that night that any liquid or condensation that was on a car would turn to ice. And what Ian Salmon witnessed was his friend's palm print on the driver's side window of the van that had frozen solid. So it was etched there that Don had put his hand up, probably to stop himself from falling, and the print was still on the car. And I can't even imagine what that would have been like for Ian Salmon to be out already worried about his best friend, and then he finds this copious amount of blood and Don's palm print on the window of the car. I would imagine that this poor man would have been absolutely horrified. He knows that Barbara's at home and she's freaking out. She's worried about Don. She knows he's in danger. But it was already too late, and his friend had to find the evidence that he had more than likely been murdered. So there is also blood found on the car tyres and on the driver's side door. It was also on the mudguards of the car, and even blood evidence found on a wooden paling fence that was right next to where the car was parked. There was also evidence of drag marks, which mean a scuffle, blood and hair, and 3 spent .22 caliber cartridges scattered around the car. Crime scene investigators later retrieved around 2 cupfuls of blood from the scene, and they would go on to match it to Don McKay's blood type. The doors to the van were still locked, and Don's keys were later found on the ground just beneath the van, directly below the keyhole on the driver's side door. So obviously Don had walked to his car to unlock it and put his keys in to drive away, and he was accosted from behind and killed, allegedly. Because we don't have a body yet. It's still known as the Donald McKay disappearance, but it's pretty self-evident that he was murdered. They would also find Don's briefcase inside the car, undisturbed and intact. By the following morning, Barbara McKay is certain Don will never be coming home. And though utterly devastated, she had to hold herself together for her children, as their 2 daughters had actually been away to boarding school when this happened, and the daughters were returning home that morning due to their father being missing, and Barbara had to try and keep herself together so that her children would not be frightened, that they would not be stressed until they actually knew what was going on. So I can't even imagine. You know, this couple, they had just this beautiful, perfect life and a beautiful marriage. They loved each other very much. And now she has to carry on without him simply because somebody wanted to get rid of him. I just think it's so sad. And I feel so bad for his children because they had to go through the rest of their lives without their father and without ever knowing where his body is located, and without ever being able to give him a funeral that every family deserves to be able to give to a deceased loved one. And to this day, his body still has never been recovered. So the following morning, conveniently, the local cannabis growers make it very and conveniently clear that they have all rock-solid alibis. Robert Trimboli could prove he was kilometres away in Sydney and out to dinner with a local racehorse trainer. He would also have a convenient alibi for the past Tuesday as well, when what is believed the first attempt on McKay's life was ordered in Jerilderie. The Woodward Royal Commission found that the 6 prime suspects to the murder all had convenient alibis. On the night of the murder, Tony Sergi and Dominic Sergi, nominated as principal suspects by the Commission, were on a pub crawl in Griffith with a number of local police officers. That's convenient when you think about how corrupt the police force in Griffith was and how they were in the pockets of Robert Trimboli. 2 other players, Giuseppe Barbaro and Rocco Barbaro, went to Sydney and then the Gold Coast and didn't return to Griffith until the 20th of July. Francesco Barbaro, brother-in-law of Tony Sergi and cousin of Saviero Barbaro, who had been arrested 3 months earlier for marijuana production, stayed at the Griffith Ex-Servicemen's Club, and Robert Trimboli was at a restaurant in Randwick, which is in Sydney, for those of you who are from overseas and don't know all the Sydney suburbs that well. So Randwick is where the racecourse is, where they do all the major races for Sydney. So that's why he would have been staying in that locale, because that's where the racehorse trainer would have lived, I'm assuming. McKay's disappearance made headlines around the nation, and many, such as Griffith's supervisor of detectives, James Bindon, drew the conclusion that Trimboli was responsible for the apparent contract-style killing. Trimboli had previously made death threats against McKay. The killing fueled the perception of Griffith as full of mobsters and Australia's marijuana capital. Now we move into more of the Woodward Royal Commission. The McKay case led to the then Premier Neville Wran appointing Justice Philip Woodward to lead the Woodward Royal Commission. The commission into the illegal drug trade in New South Wales. In 1979, Woodward found that McKay had been murdered by a hitman acting on instructions from the Honoured Society. And what the Honoured Society was the Griffith mob. That was what they called themselves, the Honoured Society. The Honoured Society was a Griffith-based cell of the... Now, I've got another foreign name that's going to be hard for me to pronounce, but I'm going to do the best I can. The 'Ndrangheta, a Calabrian criminal organisation. Justice Woodward, in his final report, concluded that the members of this organisation were involved in Donald McKay's murder, and they were as follows: Francesco Sergi, Dominic Sergi, Antonio Sergi, Francesco Barbaro, and Robert Trimboli. Justice Woodward requested for police to search Griffith's grass castles, but access was denied. And what I mean by Griffith's grass castles is that was what the locals would call all the mansions that were popping up around Griffith at this time, that these mafia-type people like Robert Trimboli were buying up all the mansions and building mansions in Griffith. They were known as the grass castles because they were paid for with the proceeds from the cannabis or the marijuana sales that were going on. So in the aftermath of Donald McKay's murder in 1980, Al Grasby was charged with criminal defamation when it was alleged that he was asked by state politician Michael Marr to read in the New South Wales Legislative Assembly a document that imputed McKay's wife Barbara and her family solicitor were responsible for McKay's disappearance. So this is what a disgusting little person Al Grasby was. He tried to shift blame away from probably himself and Robert Trimboli and the rest of the Honoured Society, and tried to shift the blame to his wife and his best friend. And I just think that is absolutely disgusting. And I'm really glad that most of these people have passed away, because I would just hate to think that they were still walking around just living their lives and doing whatever they want to do. That is just absolutely... Again, as you know, I have no words. An inquiry by John Nagel QC found that no decent man could have spread the scurrilous lies that Grasby had. Grasby would go on to maintain his innocence and fought a 12-year battle in the courts before he was eventually acquitted on appeal in August 1992 and was awarded $180,000 in costs. He had already lost a civil suit filed by Barbara McKay, forcing him to unconditionally apologise. We move on to another man who was involved in this, Gianfranco Tizzoni, who turned informer in 1983 and admitted his complicity in McKay's murder. Specifically, Tizzoni admitted that he had arranged for a hitman he knew only as Fred to undertake the contract. When shown photographs of possible suspects, Tizzoni fingered a man named Bazzali as the trigger man. In 1984, the coroner ruled McKay had died of willfully inflicted gunshot wounds. 2 years later, hitman James Frederick Bazali was charged over the death. Bazley claimed he was innocent, blaming alleged corrupt former Sydney detective Fred Cray as the killer, but was convicted of conspiring with Tazzoni, Trimboli and Joseph and other unknown persons to murder Don McKay, as well as the murders of drug couriers Douglas and Isabel Wilson, and they were subsequently murdered because they also turned informant and they got found out. So after that, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. In July 2012, 35 years after his disappearance, the New South Wales Police offered a $200,000 reward for information on the whereabouts of Don McKay. The reward was considered a last-ditch attempt to gain evidence from reluctant witnesses, in particular the testimony of Bazley, who was 86 in 2012 and unwell. However, in the rare moments that he broke his silence, Bazley denied he was the killer. Don McKay does leave behind a legacy that has endured. The annual Don McKay Churchill Fellowship was inaugurated in 1987. The Churchill Trust awards a Donald McKay Fellowship annually for journalists and detectives to study methods of investigating and bringing to light organised crime. In late 2008, the Rotary Club of Griffith erected a memorial in Banner Avenue, the main street of Griffith, to honour the 30th anniversary of Don McKay's murder. The statue of McKay itself is a white marble bust with a plaque inscribed with I didn't expect to get emotional over this case, but this quote gets me every time. All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And this is where we leave the sad and violent murder of Don McKay. His wife Barbara has since passed away also, but my prayers and thoughts go out to the families and children of Don McKay. To date, Don's body has never been found. And if someone out there has any information on where Don McKay's final resting place is, it's not too late to make a call and allow his children. And they have said before that they don't like the word closure, but they would like to be able to lay their father to rest, as is his right and theirs. So the New South Wales Police are offering a $200,000 reward still that leads to the whereabouts of Don McKay's body. Anyone with information that may assist police is urged to contact the Griffith Local Area Command on 02 6969 4310 or Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000. And the reward of up to $200,000 is payable for information that leads to the recovery of Donald McKay's remains. So what do you guys think about this case? I think it's pretty self-evident that it was the Griffith mob or the Honoured Society that did away with Don McKay. But I'm wondering, what did they do with his body? Why won't they just at least let the family know where he is? I think it's a bit redundant to still be hiding it now, and I really hope that somebody comes forward at some point and says, I know where your father is. This is where he is. I'm going to let the police know, and then you can have him back, because I think it's very sad, and this is what always gets me in these cases. And gets me in the feels is I can't even imagine how I would feel if I had a mother or a father, or even like a best friend, or even like somebody I'd gone to school with, just somebody that you know is a fellow human being. Suddenly they're just gone. You don't know where they are. You're pretty sure that they've died. And somebody has taken this person from you and they're just gone, and you've got no way to properly say goodbye. So I hope the family do receive some kind of relief and vindication, and that at some point Don's remains are found and they are able to inter him in the manner that he deserves. And that's going to do it for today's case. I would love to hear your thoughts and theories in the comments section below, but as I need to keep reminding people, please always keep it respectful between me and you and each other as well, and keep YouTube a nice place for everyone. So that's going to do it for this week's case, and keep keep your eyes peeled because we are off again this weekend with Clarence Valley Paranormal. I had a little break last weekend because it was my Samhain holiday, and that is a Celtish tradition that I celebrate in this southern hemisphere of Australia on the 29th of April. It's actually our version of Halloween. And it's just a night to honour your past loved ones and make some really good food and just sit around and reminisce about people that have gone before and play their songs and just think about them, and it's all very nice. I was going to try and film the things that we do for Samhain, but the problem was I actually got sick again. I'm okay actually with the histamine resistance now. I'm getting a lot better. I finally ate a lot of the foods that I was missing out on for a while again, so that's really nice. But as you can probably hear, I do have a little bit of a cold at the moment, and it was probably at its worst the day I was trying to get ready for our version of Halloween. I slept all afternoon, and then I just had to get up and quickly make some food that I could actually eat, and then just, have a little sit around with my husband and talk about our lost loved ones and look at their photos and play their songs. And then I was out for the night because I just was not feeling well. So I'm sorry I didn't get that filmed for you guys. I really wanted to do it, but I was just too tired and too ill on that particular day to film it. But I'm starting to get over this cold now, I hope. And we'll be definitely on for Clarence Valley Paranormal this weekend. We'll be doing another video, and it's going to be a little bit more localised this time to give us a break from travelling, and then the following weekend we are off for another road trip. But as always, if you want to see where we're going, you need to keep watching. You need to keep your likes, shares, comments and subscriptions coming. As I keep mentioning, we are trying so hard to get to our 1,000 subscribers so that we can become monetised and we can start funding further trips away and better equipment so we can make you guys much better and more interesting videos. So to all my subscribers who are constant watchers and have been so supportive, thank you guys so much. You have no idea what it means to me that you're helping me out like this, because without you I wouldn't be here. So I love you all very much. I appreciate all of you so much, and I think that's going to do it for today. I'll see you all again soon in my next video. Please stay safe. It's getting very cold here in Australia, so if any of you guys are from Australia, please stay warm, stay rugged up, enjoy a hot chocolate or some pumpkin soup, and I will be seeing you all again very soon in my next video. Bye.